Welcome back to Close Up. Sticking with the municipal theme today, we are heading from the Queen City to the Seacoast now, bringing in the Mayor of Portsmouth, Declan McEachern. Mr. Mayor, thanks for being here.
Adam, always a pleasure.
Let's start with the issue of housing and affordable housing specifically. Obviously, over the last couple decades, Portsmouth has gotten quite pricey. What's being done to ensure that working families can still afford to live in your city?
Sure, it's probably one of the biggest priorities that we have, and it's a couple of different phases. First, we have municipal property. We looked at all of the property within the city, what's capable to build and where we're going to do that. We have an RFP. We expect that back the next council meeting to turn an old school and the site there into permanently affordable housing. Two, the private sector is also going to be a part of this. We've changed the zoning to incentivize that. So if you're building and you're looking to build more, you have to now include affordable housing as a part of that. And then third, we changed the zoning where housing wasn't previously allowed. We're including that. And so you might have seen the Episcopal Church in Portsmouth. They're breaking ground on 44 apartments that are going to be permanently affordable. That's because we changed the zoning to allow that to happen. So it's the forefront. We want to make sure that we continue to be an economically diverse city. It's important to Portsmouth, and we're making progress to do so.
It can be hard to compete against those economic pressures. What is lost if that, working class person, that lower middle class person can no longer afford to live in Portsmouth?
I heard a phrase recently. It's the quality of life. People know what that is. Quality of place. Portsmouth has always been a working port. We've had the Air Force Base, we have the shipyard, we have a lot of people that come together now, service workers, that make Portsmouth an interesting place because it's not just one opinion, it's a bunch of different viewpoints coming together. We're the city, the open door, and that means a lot of people with different viewpoints, different economic backgrounds. If we don't have that, we're not going to be the same place that I grew up in, and we're not going to be the place that attracts so many people to come in and just enjoy it.
On the housing issue, what is the state not doing that it should be doing?
They talk a lot about kind of educating boards, and they spend a lot of time focusing on, helping zoning boards learn the importance of housing. It would be great if instead of that, they were focused on money. Sending money to places where people are permitting and building housing. We got education funding that's going to be coming up in the future. Would love to see that tied in some way to those communities that are actually putting a dent in affordable housing, putting a dent in any housing. I think that's going to be over the next 2 years what we're going to have to start solving if we want to actually build more housing and incentivize all of the communities in our state to do so, or recognize that when you don't, that's also an action. Inaction is an action, and if you're not looking to solve that by building housing, there's going to be consequences in terms of the money that might not be going to that community, going to another one.
There's such an emphasis on local control in New Hampshire, though. How do you end up convincing either carrot or stick some of these other smaller towns that don't want the development to bring it in?
It's not so much, carrot and stick. I guess that's a decent framework. The framework I would use is that if you're going to choose to not have housing, there's flow down effects from that. And we got to have the state that's in a position to, when we're looking at divvying up funds and where those funds are going, so far it's been a population based, okay, Portsmouth, doesn't matter that you send about $40 million of room and meals revenue to the state, you're 23,000, so you're going to get $1.8 million back. There has to be a different formula when it looks at that, because the investments that each community needs to make, those are investments. Portsmouth should be building more housing than other communities. We have a brand new sewer plant. We can have more people. But if we're not going to see any return in terms of the investment that's needed in that, that's going to be a problem, and we're not going to be able to keep doing that.
You mentioned the state money and education funding, obviously.
The big three.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, hey, you've been an outspoken voice on this, and it's put you at odds with some Democrats who believe in a different view of education funding, but you have a municipal hat to wear and obviously represent the Portsmouth taxpayers. What's the problem as you see it with the idea of returning to this concept of donor towns and Portsmouth sending money up?
If we're going to just take property tax, and we're looking at property tax, and we're just going to take a lob off the top, and we're going to say, hey, this property tax is a representation of how rich people are. I know in Portsmouth that's not the case. In Portsmouth we lead the state in terms of senior tax discounts that we can have, exemption status there. We have to look at it differently. Property tax is not equal across the state. cities and towns make different decisions that makes their property more or less valuable. If Portsmouth's a town, we have 3% of all of our land in current use. If we're talking about sending that to a town like our city like Claremont, where there's nearly 70% of that in current use, those are different decisions that are being made on the municipal level that directly affect the tax rate. So I'm happy to talk about ways to do that as long as they're tied to who's addressing the housing crisis here in our state.
But certainly Claremont doesn't enjoy certain advantages that Portsmouth enjoys in terms of location and things like that, and economic opportunity, although it could be argued at times in the past it was better off in Claremont than in Portsmouth. But still, what is the most fair way to solve this problem if having donor towns is not fair?
So, one, we got plenty of fees throughout the state. What we're talking about with the business profit tax, that's a tax that every business registers with the state. But looking at the property tax, like, and I'm going to push back a little bit on differences in terms of the educational value or the property. We got developers that are developing in Portsmouth that are also developing in Claremont. So, there is a lot of opportunity, and the decisions when it comes to zoning of crowding out and not allowing that development to happen that would lower everybody else's taxes in the process, that's a decision that we have to look at. We also have to look at who has tax caps. There's a lot that goes into it that towns and cities make decisions that are not taken into account by the state when we just try to look at the property tax written large.
Now, foreign policy isn't the purview of most city councils, but this has become a big issue for Portsmouth. A lot of other towns where people have showed up and wanted to have the discussion about ceasefire now related to Israel and Gaza. Some would argue that's the wrong venue, but it's a free country and people get to express themselves. Do you think those folks are helping their cause by bringing that national issue to city councils that can really do nothing about it?
Well, it was brought to Portsmouth. We decided that it was not aligned to the municipal affairs in terms of our decision on it. It's not that effective or not effective. At the end of the day, people expect municipal government to solve things. We don't get to pass it down. This is where we make a decision. And that argument was simply too big for Portsmouth. Even though the intentions probably on both sides of that were trying to make a compromise, people come with priors, they come with national feelings about it, international feelings about it, and it was very clear that as that conversation went on, it wasn't improving the dialogue, it wasn't improving the relations between, folks that, were leaning towards the Palestinian cause or the Israeli cause. And it was, it had an opportunity to pull more people apart. The opportunity on the local level is to have conversations, not resolutions that carry no weight on the international. And when we can have that opportunity to put people in a room and have a conversation, that's where we have the opportunity, at least on the local level, to move that dialogue forward and bring more people together.
You make an interesting point I hadn't considered, the idea that government is so dysfunctional farther up the line that people do feel compelled to come to the municipal level where people will at least listen to something.
Yeah, it's we don't get the chance. We just don't have the opportunity to be dysfunctional. We have to pay our teachers. We have to pass our budgets. We passed our budget in Portsmouth earlier this week. It's just people expect it because they don't expect the partisan nature of politics to get in there, and partisan politics really kind of undermines people making compromises, listening to one another, and having a shared view of we're going to not get everything that we want, but we're going to get everything that we need.
The homeless issue. Obviously, this is tied into housing, which we talked about before, but in the bigger picture, I'm curious, as a municipal leader, there's a lot of Supreme Court cases that have been in here. There's a U.S. District Court case that came through in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2018. Some would argue that's been part of the impetus for this, the idea that a city can't do anything about camping if the services aren't there to provide for people so they can camp anyway. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that in principle, that if there aren't enough services, people should just be able to be wherever they want?
So I think that we have, at least when it comes to Portsmouth, we have ordinances that say when there are activities that occur on these fields, camping is not allowed, and we enforce those. And we're pretty clear about enforcing those, and our police do a fantastic job about that. We also have a lot of services within the city of Portsmouth. When this whole debate on, not debate, but the mayors came together and we're trying to figure out what we can do about this. We have nearly 120 beds in Portsmouth that rivals any other place in the state, and we have a model when it comes to Crossroads House of not just looking at the beds, but looking at the caseworkers to make sure that homelessness can affect anyone. You are one health emergency away from not having a place to live. And those caseworkers are really critical to making sure that navigating that process, getting people back into housing, working with Portsmouth Housing Authority, working regionally to find housing. The caseworkers and that model, I think, is what we're going to see spread throughout the state, because we're not going to be able to simply build more beds and expect that to solve the problem. We have to make sure that it is a temporary situation. We're getting people back on their feet and moving towards, not being in the shelter.
We got to hit the break real soon here, but do you want the state to legalize cannabis? Should the legislature vote for this franchise model?
What I saw is that there is an opportunity to do so. I think it would be in, we'll get one store maybe in Portsmouth, and we'll have the ability to completely keep people from smoking in the streets. And from a municipal standpoint, that's probably the biggest issue that people are coming to me with, is people are going to be vaping and toking up, in Market Square, and we can say no to that and enforce that. So I'm fine with it.
All right, Mayor McEachern, thanks for joining us on Close Up. We appreciate the time.
Thank you, Adam.
All right, we'll be right back with a look at the shakeup in the 2nd District race with State Senator Becky Whitley dropping out.